No light in Appledore tunnel. A Halloween special story written by ButterflyCoffee. It had been dismal ever since she entered the county. Julie had left Newton Abbot 3 days ago with a heavy freight, headed for a construction site in the depths of Kent, and now she was headed home. Normally she'd be glad to be off on her way, but this night it was pouring with rain. The lamps on her buffer beam and the light from her cab were the only things to guide her, but that didn't stop the night from being suffocatingly black. Wind howled and buffeted the Black Five as she forged on. Her driver stood grimly at the regulator. "If this keeps up, we may have to stop," he said to the fireman. "Aye," agreed his companion. "You can bet, pound to a pinch, that all the coastal towns will be huddling in fear if weather like this reached them." "You can jog right on, mate," grunted Julie. "I'm not stopping out in blasted rain like this, not if I can help it." "Sorry, old girl," said the driver, "but I'm not planning on ending my life by lightning strike." Julie hoped there wouldn't be any lightning as she thundered on into the darkness, but as time drew on, the weather did not improve. The air became choked with thunderclouds, and Julie and her crew soon decided it would be safer to take refuge. They did so, in a deserted bay platform, just as the first lightning flashes began. Julie was glad to be out of the rain, but she was terrified at spending a stormy night here in the middle of nowhere. "It's okay, lass," comforted her driver. "We're not going to be heading out there anytime soon." "Tell that to my crankpins," Julie gulped as the thunder rolled above her. She didn't mind thunderstorms, but she always got nervous when they were right on top of her. "You'll be okay, my love, just hold on," called her driver. "Yes, just stay here and you'll be safe. No need to worry," said a voice. Julie looked about her and saw a figure standing on the platform. He looked like an engine driver and stood facing Julie with his hands in his pockets, no overcoat and no umbrella to protect him from the elements. It was as if he was perfectly content to be looking like a washed-up trout. Julie was concerned. "Don't you want to take some kind of shelter?" she called as lightning blasted through the sky. "A little rain never hurt anyone now, did it?" he asked cheerily. "This isn't just a little rain," Julie thought miserably. The minutes ticked by and the storm still didn't let up. By now the driver and fireman had upped sticks and headed for the nearest town to find some human company and a pint or two, as well as shelter from the rain, leaving poor Julie at the station. The Black Five was cold, wet, and thoroughly depressed. At least that engine driver on the platform kept her from being frightened. He talked to her to soothe her and kept her fire going to keep her warm. He walked up and down the platform a few times before staring into the sky and clicking his tongue. "Reminds me of the old story the men used to talk about on nights like this." "What story?" asked Julie. "The story of Appledore Tunnel, of course," the man smiled. "Haven't you heard?" "No," replied Julie. "I hadn't even heard of Appledore until you just said it." She glanced up at the rain and shivered. "You know, I wouldn't mind a story if you've got one. It'll help to pass the time. And the storm with any luck," she added as the thunder crashed again. The man stood in a blasting wind, dripping wet, and chuckled. "Very well then," he called, and his story of Appledore Tunnel began. "I began working on that stretch of line as a boy in 1935, apprenticed to an ailing signalman. He told me all about the line's history. There'd been a patch of trouble with it in the past before I came along." "What kind of trouble?" Julie asked. "There was talk of the line being extended, and when people finally got around to it, they faced a dilemma. Before the town of Appledore there was a steep hill, and the decision was made to cut a tunnel through it instead of running over it or around it. As soon as that was done, the old signalman took an immediate dislike to it. He didn't trust the tunnel at all, thought it was a bad place. Was it a big tunnel?
Big enough. Around 600 yards, give or take. But it was curved, so you couldn't see either entrance from inside. The old signalman talked about it all the time, but nobody paid him much mind. He passed away thinking the tunnel was cursed, and in time I sort of thought the same. Anyway, some years later, I'd say late 1938, I was on duty in the box on a dark autumn night. It looked like a storm would break sooner or later. I got word that a ballast load was due through, so I set the signals and waited for the loco to arrive from the tunnel mouth at my end. But it never did. This wasn't uncommon though. We'd had bad weather the night before and that made the hillside prior to landslides. I rang through and checked, but everything seemed okay on the other side. By now I was worried, because 5 minutes had gone and nothing had happened. No one came from the tunnel to warn me of an accident, nothing. I telephoned the station and asked them to send someone up to check. A nasty feeling creeped up on me and I hoped like hell it wasn't what I thought it was.
Julie listened with interest.
A few minutes later the chap returned.
The man continued.
I asked him, "Where's the train then?" He looked at me like a bomb had dropped. "Not there," he said. We both took lanterns and checked the tunnel end to end, and I argued with him till we were blue in the mouth, but he was right. An engine, its crew, its train, and the guard had completely disappeared, vanished into thin air. It caused a stir, but nothing was really done about it. War was fairly imminent, and we were all worrying too much about that to take notice. Everything was covered up. The families of the missing crew were paid compensation by the southern region, and nothing was said afterwards. There was talk of a strike the next time a train passed through the tunnel, but when that did happen, the train ran without a hitch, so everything went back to normal. Well, as normal as you could get. It was early 1940 by the time everything seemed resolved.
Julie understood entirely. She wheeshed a cloud of steam as she remembered the day the Second World War broke out. Life had never quite been the same since then. The man carried on when the Black Five gave him her attention.
For a while, nothing happened and the services ran as normal. But then in 1942, it happened again. An outbound passenger train to London was running through the tunnel, but I got wind that it never came out the other side. I didn't want to go through after the last incident, and the hairs stood on the back of my neck as I checked the tunnel. There was nothing. No wreckage, no steam, no bodies. The train had vanished again.
Julie suddenly thought of an accident that happened around the same time this man was talking about. A split-second flash of lightning made her wince before she spoke. I remember some kind of incident, she said. Do you know much of the Jackstown incident? The Jackstown incident was that a Lancaster plane was attempting to return to base when it ran out of fuel. The crew bailed out and the plane crashed into a passenger train destined towards London. The man shook his head gravely.
You don't know the half of it, my dear, he said quietly. Here's what they really did. The men got so freaked out by this they had some old trucks placed in the tunnel, put a full tanker against them, and torched the whole thing, letting it burn to the ground, and used that story of the bomber as cover-up.
No! Julie was in absolute disbelief. The men must have gotten the sack for vandalizing property like that, especially in wartime when it's most needed.
They didn't,
said the man, shifting his weight to the other foot and running a hand through his drenched hair.
Back then you didn't ask questions about what went on, even if it seemed a bit fishy. Anyone who did get a bit nosy was told that the fire had burnt everything so badly it was unrecognizable. After that, an aircraft accidentally dropped a bomb on the hill and tunnel, and it was deliberately collapsed about halfway along before the tunnel was bricked up and the line shifted to enter the town in a different direction. After D-Day, somebody caught wind of the tunnel's state and had it filled. I don't think people even recognized it had been there.
Julie was stunned. She finally asked, What about you?
Ah, said the man knowingly. Folks say the mystery lies with the signalman, old Fred Towler.
Julie was about to speak again when she heard voices on the other side of the station. She diverted her attention towards some nearby bushes and suddenly felt edgy. It was only her driver and fireman coming back from the nearby town. Julie wheezed a sigh of relief. As her crew boarded the cab, Julie turned back to the man who told her his story. But he was gone. The engine had heard no footsteps, no farewell greeting. It was as if he'd completely disappeared. Julie felt cold again.
It's a pity we couldn't bring you down to the pub, the driver joked, drawing her attention to him. They had a lovely fire roaring in there.
Julie laughed. It's okay, at least I have a roaring fire now.
Say, who were you talking to just now? The driver asked.
What do you mean?
As we were coming back, we heard you talking. Sounded like good conversation to us.
Julie told her crew about the man on the platform and the story of Appledore Tunnel. They glanced at each other with wide eyes and slowly turned to their engine.
Julie, that wasn't just some old signalman, her driver stammered.
Then who was it? Asked Julie in surprise.
You won't believe us, said her driver. But that were old Fred Towler, the former signalman. The one who's been dead for around 10 years or so.
You what? I think the pair of you have had too much beer or whatever it is called.
Julie.
Her fireman went white as the moon started to clear the sky.
Look at that station sign over there.
They all looked. At the end of the platform stood a faded green sign with white lettering. Appledore. Julie's tubes ran cold. She shivered a small hiss of steam from her cylinder cocks. Whatever happened to old Fred Towler? She asked after a while. The fireman was the one who spoke up.
From what my dad told me when I was a lad, old Towler wanted to overcome his fear before the tunnel was covered up for good. He grabbed a lamp, a pick, and told his mate to stick the kettle on for him.
Then what?
All they found of him was his hat the next morning, just inches short of a safety recess in the wall.
Wait, are you telling me that I was... The driver and fireman said nothing. Julie didn't say anything either. No more needed to be said. Both engine and crew felt a little bit ill for the rest of the trip home.